Okay.
Okay. This is great, Patrick, that we're getting a chance to have this conversation and that we're going to do this for the folks who are following us. And I really appreciate that you asked me to enter into this conversation with you because we're going to be talking about the toxin sequestration theory. And that's a lot of syllables. So I'm thinking that some people might like a little context for how this came about, that your whole thinking on this. And then we're going to do some connect the dots to oxalate and maybe throw some questions back and forth. So, but I'm going to let you start by giving us a bit of a Reader's Digest condensed version for those of us who are old enough to remember what that means about your thinking with this toxin sequestration theory.
Sounds great. Thank you, Monique. And I just wanted, for the audience's benefit, to mention that I've been following Monique for quite a while. Basically, ever since I've got on the carnivore diet a year and a half ago, I started oxalate dumping immediately when I went on the carnivore diet.
Yep.
And so I was constantly watching Monique's videos and leaving comments and questions on her videos. And I just wanted to deeply thank Monique for her help in helping me get through oxalate dumping. It's been, it wasn't easy. And so naturally I reached out to Monique recently about this new theory, toxin sequestration theory, to try to get her thoughts on it. And I'm looking forward to this conversation to get some feedback from Monique. So anyway, let's dive in. And the idea, there's sort of a broader underlying philosophy, I would say, behind this theory, which is that our bodies are sort of brilliant and strategic and purposeful in terms of what they do. I would say that's like the underlying philosophy. It also kind of is the opposite of the standard mainstream view on our bodies. It's very well known that mainstream medicine likes to paint our bodies as broken and faulty, and kind of dumb, and things that have to be fixed with pharmaceutical drugs and treatments and everything. The other part of this story is that we are being exposed to a lot of toxins, and it does look like the number of toxins we're exposed to, or the amount of the toxins, has increased over time. And it does seem to align well with the rise in chronic disease. So over the past century, toxins have gone up, and then chronic disease has gone up. So my sort of broader view is that toxins look like they're a problem, and that they are a root cause of disease. I mean, we can dive into how that actually works in practice. There is an interesting unified theory of toxicity based on oxidative damage. So you can sort of define a toxin based on, does it create oxidative damage to the body's tissues?
That's an interesting that's a keystone piece for everybody who's listening to this.
Yeah. And so that is very interesting, because there are certain chemicals that you might think are bad for you, like cholesterol. And you can ask, like, oh, does cholesterol create oxidative damage to the body? You look it up, it's like, no, it doesn't. So it's not a toxin. So cholesterol is not a toxin. But then there's other chemicals that you might think are perfectly fine, like maybe glucose, for example, or fructose, and then you look up, oh, does it create oxidative damage to the body? And the answer is like, yes, actually it does. So when in excess in particular. So this allows us to basically figure out like what is toxic and what's not toxic with this kind of definition. And in any case, and of course, in the case of oxalate, which is Monique's expertise, it is a toxin, and it does.
Well, and for sure it does. It creates oxidative damage, and so that's it definitely fits in this criteria. But it might be very confusing to people to hear glucose and fructose added to this lineup, right?
Right.
And so I'd love to hear what what you say about that, because
Yeah.
I do think this is one of those places where people would kind of immediately tune out, and
Yeah.
we don't want them to tune out. We want them
Oh
to
yeah,
stay in here. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, so the easiest way to see that sugar could be toxic is to look at diabetics, basically. So people who do have diabetes, and they will have chronically elevated blood sugar,
Right.
it's very well known that diabetics have tissue damage, damage to their retinas. It's called retinopathy,
Yep.
damage to their kidneys, damage to their peripheral nerves, called neuropathy, as
Yep.
well as damage to their arteries. And that has a technical name. It's called basically like diabetic complications. And diabetic complications is the technical name for the tissue damage that comes with chronically elevated blood sugar. And that is a direct manifestation of the toxicity of sugar. There's really no other explanation for it other than basically sugar is damaging those organs. And then you might ask, well, why those particular organs and not others? And those are the organs that are actually most vulnerable to sugar's toxicity, because I think they don't have the ability to kind of downregulate their sugar transporters in response to high blood sugar. So that's why it's always those kind of like 4 organs.
Okay.
So, but anyway, so, you know, if we accept the fact that diabetics have tissue damage, but I think it's kind of well known, then that points to the obvious fact that it's really sugar that's damaging the body's tissues. And you know, there is I actually pulled this from the medical literature. I can cite papers. There's a beautiful review paper by a guy named Michael Brownlee, and you know, he gives a name to this. He calls it glucotoxicity. So that term, glucotoxicity, is used in the medical literature to describe basically what happens whenever sugar is in excess. And you know, it is of course worth noting that sugar, glucose in particular, plays a physiological role in the body at low concentrations, right?
Yes.
And so I'm really talking about the modern diet where
Yes.
people are eating candy bars and drinking sodas, and that's like not ancestrally relevant. And so that's really what I'm referring to here, is in this modern diet where people have basically glucose overload or fructose overload. That's what's really causing tissue damage and organ damage here.
And do you know a little bit about what the mechanism is? Again, just for, you know, people like me who are just curious about these things, because I'm 100% with you on the whole glucose. I'll just say right now that in some cases where I'm dealing with people who are having potentially energy compromise because of what oxalate does, I will talk to them about the Goldilocks zone for where they want to have enough of the right kind of energy. And I'll actually refer to, you know, stripped down glucose or fructose as rocket fuel, because rocket fuel is dangerous, right? It's not just good. It's like this careful management. So just tell us a little bit about what glucose is doing that actually results in this oxidative stress.
Yeah, the underlying mechanism of oxidative stress or oxidative damage are these microscopic chemicals called ROS, or reactive oxygen species.
Right.
They're very small molecules with just a couple atoms. And a good example is the hydroxyl radical. It's OH with a free radical. These chemicals, as the name suggests, are highly reactive. They basically just indiscriminately react with anything in their surroundings. So
Right.
like the first thing that they encounter, they react with basically. So if they bump into a protein, they'll stick to a protein. If they bump into a lipid or DNA, they'll stick to that. So as you can imagine, when you have these free radicals around, they're just going to be damaging and misshaping biomolecules, because the body puts so much effort into folding these proteins into beautiful structures so that they can
Just
catalyze.
so, right?
Right?
Like proteins are not just strings of things. They have these complex shapes and stuff, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the body works really hard to get the shape just perfect so that it can like catalyze a reaction or something. And then all of a sudden you have these little oxygen containing molecules like being stuck to it. And that's not good for biological function. And so it's going to basically ruin the biological function of these molecules. And then you're left with like a non-functional cell, like a cell that can't function. And that's what we would call like dead tissue or damaged tissue. And sure enough, glucose creates that in excess, as well as fructose. And that's the broader mechanism by which all toxins, manifest their toxicity. They all create these ROS chemicals. There's more than one ROS. In addition to hydroxyl radical, there's also the hydroxyl radical is the worst one. That's the most reactive. The least reactive is hydrogen peroxide. And then there's kind of like an intermediate one, which is called superoxide. That's basically like an oxygen molecule with an extra electron. But they're really small. They only have a couple atoms, right? And
it's really easy for them to bind to things. It's really easy for them to react with things, right?
Yeah, exactly. So in any case, what was interesting about this Michael Brownlee paper on glucotoxicity is he said that in the literature in the past, they had like 4 different pathways by which glucose could create damage to the body's tissues. And then they had like a eureka moment where they unified all 4 pathways via ROS. And basically they said, oh, every single pathway creates ROS.
Right.
And
that's
so
where,
that was
that's
kind of
where it's
like,
all together.
Yeah. And so they managed to unify it. And like one pathway is like, it inhibits some enzyme. Another pathway, it like messes up the electron transport chain or something. So, but in any case, they all go through ROS. So in that sense, I think the theory of toxicity is kind of beautifully unified via these ROS chemicals. And I will point out that I'm not the first person to point this out. There's been, for example, a doctor, his name is Thomas Levy. He wrote a book called The Only Cause of Disease. And he precisely identifies this mechanism as the cause of disease, basically oxidative damage of the body's tissues from toxins, is what he identifies there. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking for context for people, if they're wondering, like, what's the right level of sugar that they could have in their bodies? If you have normal blood sugar, just for context, it's a teaspoon of sugar in your entire bloodstream. And I don't think people realize how much carbohydrate, which is all going to result in sugar that's in your system. They don't realize how much carbohydrate is in a lot of what they eat. And so unless it's non-digestible fiber or something like that, anything else, your body is going to, in the process of digestion, snip apart those glucose and fructose and other molecules, right? And that's what's going into your system. And there's some great visuals by, I'm not going to be able to think of his name now, but there's this doctor out of the UK who took all kinds of foods and then reduced them to teaspoons of sugar. And it's really eye-opening. If I can find his, I know who he is. I can't pull the name at the moment. But if I can find his chart, I'll stick it in the notes for this, because most people think, oh, if I eat an apple, that's great. It's still, as far as your body's concerned, other than the non-digestible fiber, that's all little sugars that's all going to cut apart. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should point out that, in this theory, I'm trying to be ambitious in the sense that I'm trying to develop a theory of not just cancer, but also disease more broadly. And it is very common for people to laser focus on cancer and just develop a cancer theory.
Right.
And, there are various cancer theories. There's the standard genetic theory of cancer. There's a Seyfried's metabolic theory of cancer. There's also a parasite theory of cancer. There's a fungal theory of cancer. And so I have found that to really understand cancer, I have had to zoom out to the bigger picture and say, what is the cause of disease? And then if we understand that it's this oxidative damage from toxins that is driving, diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, heart disease, kidney disease, then it can maybe give us a different perspective on what is going on with cancer. So I just want, so that sort of set the stage basically to say, okay, we're exposed to a lot of toxins. Some of the things that there's some things we don't even realize are toxins that we're exposed to. And then
like excess sugar, which people don't think of as a toxin. Yeah.
Right. And then there's, with that, being said, now how do we combine that with this idea that the body is brilliant, amazing, and strategic? Because the body isn't just going to take a punch in the face without fighting back, right? So it's not just going to take it. It's going to try to find ways to fight back against these toxins. And toxin sequestration theory is basically a theory of how does the body fight back against toxins.
And that's sort of like the challenge with toxins is get it out one way or the other. Is that not sort of the sum total? Like if we leave it in dangerous places, that's not good, right? So we either have to get it out of the body or we have to get it out of circulation, so to speak, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, you either get it out of the body with excretion or you find a safe place to store it temporarily, right? To keep it away from the vital organs. I think the number one priority of the body is to prevent the toxins from reaching the vital organs and damaging the vital organs. The heart, the brain, go ahead. You want to say something?
Because it just ran through my head. So do we have any examples of toxins where the body kind of goes through an order of events, right? So I have seen to some degree this idea that I call the Goldilocks zone, which is you want to have nutrients, you even want to have good things within this zone, right? Not too little, not too much, just right. And with sugar, I know enough about that to be able to say there's evidence that things like skin tags are actually being driven by sugar. And so this is like a place where the body is kind of tried to get rid of this, in this case, excess energy, but it's dangerous excess energy. It's that rocket fuel kind of idea that I think of when I think of sugar. If you're dealing with rocket fuel, you want it managed in really tight tolerances because yes, it can be helpful and yes, it can kill you. So it's like, that's, you're kind of trying to get this Goldilocks zone. So, and to some degree, I feel like that about oxalate because our metabolism actually produces some oxalate. So our body knows, I'm going to say knows about oxalate and knows it has to get rid of it. But we have bandwidth on excretion and we have whatever's going on in our metabolism and whatever's coming in from our diet. And we kind of have to match input to output to have it just flow through as it should, right? It should be a handoff, right? I got all this good stuff from my food. I did all this stuff in my metabolism. I've got this oxalate, hot potato. So kidneys, bowels, you go do your thing, right? But you have to match input to output. If you've got way too much here and way too little here, then you've got this problem, right? And then there's excess oxalate in the body. So if we're doing something with sugar, so I'm assuming your assumption here is that we might be doing something with oxalate. So talk to me about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea of toxin sequestration theory is hierarchical in the sense that it argues that the body has kind of like a three-tiered hierarchy for how it defends itself against toxins. Tier one is basically the primary detox organs, the everyday defenses. That's the liver, the kidneys, and also it can store toxins in fat tissue as well. So it's those are kind of like the everyday primary defenses. And then whenever the toxic load increases further, we go to tier two, which is what I call the mini vaults. And you actually mentioned a mini vault, skin tags. So that's an example of a mini vault that, believe it or not, stores toxins. And you mentioned sugar in that case, but also a lot of lipophilic toxins like seed oils get stored in these skin growths. I, for example, have a lipoma on my side that I've had for 6 years back. I got it back when I was on the standard diet before I went carnivore. And so lipomas are full of seed oils, actually. They're like a skin growth, and they're so that's like a mini vault for seed oils and other fat soluble toxins. And the same is true for some other skin growths like sebaceous cysts as well. You wanted to say something?
Well, I'm going to say, like, is there any research that's looked at, like, kind of the order of events? Like, do you get skin tags first and then you get, I don't know, cysts, and then you get lipomas? Or, like, is there anything which is sort of showing the order in which the body would start to do some of this stuff?
That's a good question. And, like I said, I have it in this 3-tier thing. I was just about to get to my 3rd tier eventually.
Oh,
like
okay.
No, it's okay. Like the 3rd tier, as you can imagine, is going to be the cancer tumors, right? Because the real punchline of my story is that cancer tumors are actually storage vaults or detox organs. So that's but they're actually the most sophisticated strategy. So yeah, we do.
But also the most dangerous one, right? Like, we're getting to this sort of more complicated response that the body's trying to do.
Well, yeah, in my view, it's a sign of toxic overload. If your body is at tier 3, then you are in toxic overload. And then I sort of flip it around and say, well, if toxins are the root cause of disease and you have toxic overload, then you're in a precarious situation. And that's why I view like cancer as dangerous, in the sense that I view toxic overload as dangerous. And so it is a little bit of a adjustment in how we're viewing things, because and we can dive into that later, but I am slightly changing the angle, because I'm viewing the toxic overload as being the dangerous thing, rather than the tumor. But in any case, what so you asked about are there evidences of, like, say, this hierarchical strategy? Seed oils are a very good example. So like I said, the seed oils do drive skin growth. Absolutely. So not just lipomas, but also even pimples, by the way, but also sebaceous cysts. Those are in skin tags as well. All apparently have seed oils. And of course, these things will have multiple types of toxins in them. But then the seed oils also are a key driver of cancer. So it's well known that prostate cancer is full of seed oils. So prostate tumors are absolutely packed full of seed oils. And that's because the prostate is a fatty tissue. And so it's good at sequestering these fat soluble toxins. And so, but anyway, so seed oils give us a nice example of, like, okay, well, at moderate levels, you might get some skin growths, whereas at very high levels, they might drive even cancer tumors themselves. And then I'll give another example, which is an industrial toxin called asbestos. So this was very popular in the 1900s.
But it was used everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Home insulation, brake pads. Like I know of a number of different places where you would end up having to deal with asbestos. And I'm pretty sure my parents had a house at one point where we had to, like, clear out the house. Somebody redid all our insulation because some of it was asbestos. And so this was used in all kinds of things, right? Flame retardant materials.
So it was very well known in the 1900s that asbestos was driving mesothelioma, which is a particular type of lung cancer, and it gets lodged in the lungs. Imagine these little spiky mineral-based things. They're silicates, but they're very spiky, and then they get lodged in the lungs. And what the body does as its first line of defense is actually something called an asbestos body. That is a mini vault. So that's actually tier 2. And it actually basically takes the asbestos, it kind of coats it in iron and then wraps it in a protein shell. And that's called an asbestos body. And so that's actually a mini vault. It's not a full-blown tumor or anything. And so, but when the asbestos levels get worse, then it actually can drive mesothelioma. So in mesothelioma is a full-blown tumor. And they have found asbestos at very high concentrations inside of mesothelioma tumors. So anyway, so that's another example of using this hierarchical strategy. First the asbestos bodies, and then the mesothelioma. And then finally, circling all the way back to oxalate. Naturally, love to get feedback on this, but in my theory, the body also takes a hierarchical strategy with respect to oxalate. And it is a little bit of an unconventional view, but nevertheless, calcifications in my theory are basically thought of as the body trying to deploy calcium in order to neutralize the toxicity of oxalate. It's basically like calcium is kind of like the yin to the yang of oxalate, right? In the sense that like oxalate's a -2 charge, and
calcium's a positive 2.
Calcium's a positive 2, right? So in that sense, you can kind of like neutralize oxalate with calcium. And of course, we have a huge reservoir of calcium in our body, which is our bones, our teeth.
Bones, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we have this massive reservoir, and the body can sort of say at some point that, okay, if I have all these oxalate molecules floating around and they're going to cause all kinds of oxidative damage, let me try to deploy calcium. And then calcification would then represent a tier 2 mini vault to sequester the oxalates. And then, of course, whenever the oxalate toxicity gets worse, then it can drive actual cancer tumors. And it's well known that oxalates drive breast cancer, as well as some other types of cancer. They drive kidney cancer as well, thyroid cancer. So there are several different cancers that they drive. So each of those cases show the kind of hierarchy in this sort of theory. Yeah.
Right. So this is definitely a place where I think it would be worthwhile to go into the hyperoxaluria literature more, because depending upon where someone's found in their journey with primary hyperoxaluria. So I'm not talking about oxalate from your diet per se, because we don't really pay attention to oxalate from your diet. We don't pay any attention until the kidneys are damaged. Lots of things have been happening long before we get to the kidneys damage. But in the field of primary hyperoxaluria, where genetically you've got a glitch and your body's making oxalate, I'm really curious if they have any idea of where it starts to deposit first and then where things go wrong first, because that would be a really interesting tie-in here. And I did not have time to go into the literature, but that's probably going to be the next thing that I do, to try and see what's the order of events with oxalate, because I suspect that there is going to be first places that are impacted by oxalate. And I'm going to suspect that that's going to have to do with a combination of where the body can put it, because it's got the transport for it, and what's presumably less dangerous under this kind of a theory, and then where you escalate from there. I mean, it was devastating to me when I first read the research that showed that oxalate was a trigger for breast cancer. I just thought, oh my gosh, this is news that every woman has to understand in terms of their choice for diet. And here we are being promoted these heavily plant-based diets. And I did know a woman in her 30s who ended up with breast cancer twice. And she was a heavily plant-based eater. And now I have to wonder if all of that happened and it was completely unnecessary, right? That she was in this situation where she was eating extra healthy. God, I love that. This just doesn't line up with extra healthy at all. And that oxalate was what got her. But there's also the sort of stepping stones, if you will. Some of us never get a kidney stone. I almost have wondered off and on whether or not kidney stones were actually an example of the kidneys functioning better, as opposed to worse, right? We treat kidney stones like it's a sign that the body's not doing what it's supposed to do, but maybe it's actually doing it better than for others. So that would be an interesting exploration here.
Right.
And then the other thing is that we do end up with a lot of people in the hyperoxaluria world. Like, I'm back to primary hyperoxaluria where there is a glitch. Um, and the bones are one of the biggest storage locations for oxalate. And of course, calcium has this really nice tight bond with oxalate. I talk about oxalate and calcium as preferred dance partners, right? They fall in love, they get married, and away they go. And the challenge there is that you've got, yeah, this huge calcium storage vault in your body called your skeleton. And if you're eating a lot of oxalate, it makes me wonder about the apparent, I'm going to say, epidemic of osteoporosis and osteopenia, because we're eating these highly plant-based diets, right? So the proper structure there, what if it's not being built because of the calcium oxalate love affair?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with everything you just said, actually. And it actually fully agrees with this sequestration theory. Let's start with hyperoxaluria.
Sure.
In that case, like you said, it's like a condition or genetic condition where patients produce excessive oxalate.
Yeah, they're just producing too much through their metabolism. Their diet's almost an afterthought when they're producing really high amounts out of their metabolism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they often do develop recurring kidney stones.
Isn't that often how they're found? Like, people who are producing that much oxalate, they've got such a burden in their body. I think kidney stones are some of the first ways that they get found. So you almost have to hope that their kidneys are doing that, because otherwise all sorts of things are happening in the body that we know of from the literature. Like, it's affecting their like all kinds of organs.
Yes.
You can have oxalate in your eyes. Now that
Yeah.
I know that happens to people who have a dietary high intake,
Right.
but yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
of
And
that kind of thing.
It can get into the heart, even the heart.
Into the inner ear, because the inner ear uses calcium, and yeah, and
Right.
of course thyroid, liver, like anything where
Yeah.
they're trying to deal with this.
Yeah, so the technical name they give to the very bad condition where the oxalates are throughout the body, they call it systemic oxalosis.
Oxalosis, yeah.
Systemic oxalosis is what we don't want, right? So we do not want systemic oxalosis.
That's the highest tier.
Yeah, that's like...
It would be, sorry, it just occurred to me, it'd be interesting to see what the incidence of cancer is in that quadrant of people as well. Because we certainly see all kinds of other things, but...
Right. Yeah. So the goal is to basically, the body wants to prevent systemic oxalosis, where the body is totally flooded with oxalate in every organ. You don't want to have oxalates in your heart or oxalates roaming around in your arteries and then damaging your arteries.
There's great research from Dr. Aaron Miller that shows that some of this cardiovascular stuff, including plaque, has oxalate in it. So.
Exactly. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that paper. Yeah. And okay. So the idea is that if you have someone with hyperoxaluria, framing it as the body is strategic, the body wants to prevent systemic oxalosis is the idea. And so the idea is that the kidney stones kind of like are storage vaults to sequester the oxalates in the kidneys, which does actually pull them out of circulation. It does pull them out of the circulation. And that is a kind of storage vault. The general rule is the body doesn't want the criminals to roam freely. It wants them locked up in a jail. And so
I like that. That's a great metaphor.
Yeah. And so what the literature on hyperoxaluria does say is that so long as the hyperoxaluria patients can form stones, then their health tends to be okay. But then whenever they start to get a lot of kidney damage, then when their kidney function declines, then they're not able to form stones as well. And then then their health starts to decline, and then they start to get the systemic oxalosis. So
that's fascinating. Yeah. Because they can't get it out of circulation.
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually kind of some of the strongest evidence for this idea of kidney stones being protective. the hyperoxaluria case, because it looks like they do well as long as they can form stones. And then once they can't form stones anymore because their kidneys decline and everything, then they get the systemic oxalosis. So yeah, so that's interesting. And you mentioned some of the other things of like the arteries. So it is really interesting to think of like the CAC score, because people actually, for example, measure coronary arterial calcium to quantify basically how much heart disease you have or cardiovascular disease.
And how much risk you have of
risk
a heart attack or
exactly.
a stroke or whatever.
Yeah. Right. That's really interesting because, and like you said, there's a paper that shows that oxalate is inside of those calcifications in the arteries. So they've found oxalate in there. And you could view it from two different ways. You could view it as like, oh, well, like maybe the oxalate is driving the calcifications and that's the cause of heart disease. Or you could view it from the angle of, well, if the oxalate was allowed to roam freely, then that's causing the heart disease. And then the symptom is the fact that the body deploys calcium to then pull those out of circulation. And so then the calcifications in the arteries are then just a symptom of the fact that you have a lot of oxalates in your arteries. And then it's basically an indirect measure of your arterial exposure to oxalates, for example. So in that sense, it's a measure of kind of like the historical toxic burden to your arteries. And that's kind of how I'm viewing it. I'm viewing the CAC, the coronary arterial calcium, not as the culprit, but as a historical marker for how much toxicity you've been exposed to. And so in that sense, it is a useful measure. So it does correlate with heart disease. So that's how I'm viewing it. But and I will point out that calcium is also deployed to sequester fluoride as well. So another driver of calcification is fluoride, and fluoride can also be viewed as a toxin. It does, have the same mechanism of creating ROS. So, and it has that negative charge, which is like opposite to calcium. And the pineal gland is known to calcify when people have been exposed to a lot of fluoride. That's a gland that's in the brain. And fluoride is a neurotoxin. So the thought process there is that the body is basically sacrificing the pineal gland by calcifying it in order to protect the rest of the brain from fluoride, basically. And so, yeah, so that's kind of, so it looks like calcium is being deployed to neutralize the toxicity of both oxalates and fluoride in these cases. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's intriguing. It makes me think about the places where we end up seeing these things. Because one of the things that I know with oxalate, based on observing, I don't know how many thousands of people at this point, because I've been involved in the oxalate world for almost 20 years, and then as a moderator on support groups, and then it changed my life when I got healthy. Then I went on and studied to be a nutritionist, and now I've been working with clients for over a decade. And there does seem to be certain places that are more vulnerable. So if there's a similar molecule doing similar things, then it would be a curiosity of mine to see, does oxalate and maybe something like fluoride do similar things? And oxalate does have this wonderful affinity for the thyroid, apparently. And so we see a lot of people who are dealing with oxalate toxicity having thyroid issues. I was one of those. And we also see a lot of people who are having issues with oxalate dealing with sort of obviously, the urinary tract and the urinary system having issues, but also to some degree the associated, if you think of it as the urogenital system, like that system can end up with problems. And I'm really curious to see whether or not oxalate turns up in things like prostate cancer because of the fact that you've got oxalate traveling on that system, right? And are we trying to dump it someplace there? But if there's similarities between what some of these molecules are doing, because I know people have issues with the parathyroids and management of calcium in the body overall. And if you have similar things happening with fluoride, that would certainly start to shore up how we view this. Like maybe there is a unified theory here that starts to become more evident while we compare these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, oxalates have been linked to prostate cancer. So they've also been linked to, like I said, number one, as you know, breast cancer, number two, kidney cancer, number three, colon cancer, and then number four, thyroid cancer, and then, like you said, prostate as well. I do feel like it's important to point out my unconventional view on cancer, if it's okay, if I can just sort of,
Yep.
because I've been sort of hinting at it throughout our whole conversation, and I feel like it's an important message to share with people. So, which is that, in this theory of cancer, toxin sequestration theory, the cancer itself is actually not viewed as a disease. It's viewed as a defense mechanism against toxicity. And that's why I tried to set the stage with the idea that toxins are driving disease and the body fights back. And it has this hierarchical strategy for how to fight back. And in this theory, the tumors themselves are, you can either
response. You're actually talking about them as a response to the fact that we're overloaded with these other substances, which are not healthy for us. Yeah.
Yes. And so you can either view a tumor as like a toxin storage vault that stores toxins, or you can view it as a detox organ. And you can view it very similarly to, like, say, the liver. It's well known that the liver is the body's primary detox organ. And many people nowadays have been exposed to so many toxins chronically that they have liver damage. A good example, of course, would be chronic alcoholics who are drinking alcohol all the time. Then they have liver damage. And then the body can build a cancer tumor as like a backup liver, a backup detox organ, because the primary liver is damaged. So it needs extra help there. So, and like I said, cancer tumors are the most sophisticated because they do both storage as well as detox of toxins. Whereas, like, say, the skin growths, they just do storage basically. So things like the skin tags and the moles and the lipomas, they just store toxins. But cancer tumors are more sophisticated because they store toxins and they also detoxify toxins as well.
So talk to me about that, though. How is a cancer, like, I'm sure people's heads are spinning at this point. How is cancer working to detox something like oxalate? Let's use that as an example.
Well, the problem with, so the thing is, there's certain chemicals that can be detoxified and other ones that can't. Oxalate is kind of like the end of a metabolic pathway. And so it's not something that typically you can detoxify.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
that's one thing there.
Right.
Because the liver can't manipulate oxalate to make it less toxic, nor can it manipulate oxalate to make it more easy to excrete. And so oxalate is kind of one of those I just am kind of things in the body.
Exactly.
And the only thing is exit route as quickly as you can get there.
Right.
So just before you go on with the rest of this, I do want to say, as we build this mind map, the places where oxalate's most likely to cause problems are also either ground zero for exposure, or their primary exit routes, or they are tissue which the body could sacrifice, which doesn't sound good. But because any cancer along the gut, well, the gut's ground zero if your main oxalate intake is through your diet. Also, the gut is a location where we can secrete oxalate back into the gut to try and dispose of it. So there is such a thing as like bowel stones, like small intestine stones, and those can be oxalate based. And so that's an exit route. Obviously, the kidneys are doing, as I would normally say, the lion's share of the work to try and get oxalate out. But if you're talking about anything along the urinary tract, like that stuff's all going to be vulnerable if that's moving the majority of the oxalate out. So those are all places where, if this lines up, then you would expect to see the body having to roll out the maximum response kind of thing, which presumably the body's not going to choose cancer as a first line of defense, because that's kind of a risky defense, even as a defense.
Yeah, you actually said it beautifully. You described basically my tissue-specific version of my theory, which is you actually laid it out exactly perfectly, which is that
Okay.
why does the body choose specific organs for cancer tumors? And viewing the body as strategic, then we can say, well, the body kind of judiciously chooses where to store toxins. And the first principle, as you can imagine, and you just said that, is that you would probably want to store toxins where they're located, right? So like wherever they're located. And that's why things like liver cancer and lung cancer are common, because the lungs are heavily exposed to the inhaled toxins. All the inhaled toxins are there in the lungs already. So you might as well build a tumor to kind of wall off the inhaled toxins there. And then similarly, the liver has a bunch of, it's dealing with a lot of toxicity because it's the detox organ. So liver cancer is common because that's where the toxins are.
Just before we go to get further, because I want to add in on the lung thing, because we have cell transporters, the SLC26A family. There's a bunch of them in the lungs. And one of the ways that people are sometimes getting rid of oxalate is via the lungs. Mm-hmm. So I've seen clients where they had asthma or things like that, and they would go through periods of oxalate mobilization, dumping, where you get these waves of it moving out of the tissues, and would have asthma exacerbations for a while, be coughing up a lot of phlegm and things like that. It would be really interesting to see whether or not that mucus actually had oxalate in it. So as a first, it's another exit route. So I just wanted to point that out. And unfortunately, it's an access point. Mm-hmm. So there is research on the fires of, forest fires, large wildfires, things like that. You can have oxalate in the smoke that's in the air. And I don't think that's ever had much attention, but that is a way that you can get oxalate in. You can get it by inhalation. So, just
okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And just to wrap up this idea of why does the body form tumors in certain organs?
Yes,
so there's going to be certain organs that are going to be heavily exposed to toxins, like the liver, like the lungs. So then it makes sense that,
like the kidneys. Yeah.
Yeah. The kidneys. Yeah. So in the case of oxalate, we can understand why it would drive kidney cancer, because, it's concentrated in the kidneys. So, then exactly. So, but then there's going to be other organs that are kind of more strategic from the viewpoint of the body is willing to sacrifice those organs. And that's exactly what you said. But these are things that would be like peripheral tissues, things like the skin. The number one most common cancer in the world is skin cancer. And it's the most peripheral tissue. It's the tissue that's farthest away from your vital organs. And so naturally, the body is happy to build a tumor in the skin, because if it can wall off the toxins in the skin, then that means those toxins aren't even getting into the body. They're not even getting inside. So, so it's really keeping those toxins far away from the vital organs. And I believe as well for breast cancer, the body is viewing the breast as a peripheral tissue. It's viewing it as relatively far away from the vital organs. So in that sense, I'm viewing the breast cancer, the reason for breast cancer, as it being kind of like a sacrificial tissue, a tissue that is willing to sacrifice there. And then the same is true for the prostate. The prostate is not the most important organ in the body. The body is willing to sacrifice the prostate for the greater good of the body. And that's sort of can explain why prostate cancer is common. But yeah, so you actually described perfectly the principles of my tissue-specific theory. And I just wanted to bring it back to the point of, you had mentioned that oxalates can't be degraded further. And so there's going to be certain toxins that the body just really can't detox, right? And the only thing it can do is store them. And oxalates are a good example of that. And sure enough, guess what we find inside of cancer tumors? We find high concentrations of oxalates. The famous oxalates-induced breast cancer, excuse me, the famous paper, Oxalates-Induced Breast Cancer, that paper looked inside of normal breast tissue and breast tumor tissue, and they found in like almost every single sample, elevated levels of oxalate in the tumor tissue relative to normal tissue. And in some cases, they even found 10 times higher concentrations of oxalate in the breast tumor tissue. So it's clear that like the tumor tissue is just like storing the oxalates. And there's other chemicals as well that can't be detoxed. So things like toxic metals, all the heavy metals,
Heavy
mercury,
metals, yeah.
yeah, mercury, cadmium, lead, arsenic, aluminum, all of those are just stored. And sure enough, believe it or not, there's medical literature saying that they found all those toxic metals in high concentrations inside of cancer tumors. Another good example would be microplastics, forever chemicals. Those are things that the body just has to store. So those are just found at high levels. You can't really process them. So it just stores them inside of cancer tumors. But then there's other toxins that it can actually detoxify. And, probably the most famous one would be drinking alcohol, so ethanol. And because that's what's actually processed by the liver. And believe it or not, in alcohol-driven cancers, that is people who have chronic alcohol consumption and they also have cancer, those people exhibit elevated enzymes that detoxify ethanol inside the cancer tumors. So the key enzymes needed to detoxify ethanol have been shown to be elevated in alcohol-driven cancers inside the tumors. So that's very interesting. It's suggesting that the tumor is actually detoxifying ethanol. And similarly, in smoking-driven cancers, it's a different set of enzymes that the cancer tumors upregulate. They happen to upregulate the suite of enzymes that you need to detoxify the toxic chemicals in cigarette smoke. So the type of enzymes that the tumors upregulate depends on the nature of the toxicity. It's different in smoking-related cancers than it is to alcohol-driven cancers. And then when we get to, say, fructose, which, in excess is a toxin,
Right.
Normally that's processed by the liver, but it's well known that cancer tumors rapidly pull in fructose. Of course, the same is true for excess glucose as well.
Right.
And then we can reinterpret the fact that cancer loves sugar to the fact that cancer is working really hard to detoxify sugar. That's the sort of flipping of the script. It is well known that cancer upregulates its glucose transporters and its fructose transporters to pull in both glucose and fructose out of the bloodstream. And we've already talked about how hyperglycemia is a tissue damaging disease. If you have high blood sugar chronically, you will get tissue and organ damage. But the cancer tumors are actually working in the right direction. They're actually pulling the sugar out of the bloodstream. They're literally lowering your blood sugar. So they are actually lowering your blood sugar, and then they are basically detoxifying the sugar. One can dive into this, but basically we can view cancer tumors as like a detox organ for excess sugar, amongst other things, like I said. Yeah.
So that would make the most sense if, when they're no longer needed, they break down, right? Because if cancer persists beyond the fueling of it, right? If we can show that, or if there's research that shows that, because we're having a conversation, if there's research that shows that this stuff disappears once the fuel source is gone, then that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. And there is a phenomenon in the medical literature called spontaneous tumor regression, or STR.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a phenomenon where they've basically done case studies on people. So they've taken like hundreds of patients and they've documented these case studies. These are patients who were given a cancer diagnosis, but they actually opted out of conventional treatment. So they abstained from conventional medical treatment. And instead, what the patients did is they went on a low toxin diet and a low toxin lifestyle. So they just tried to reduce their exposure to toxicity and just live a healthier life. And they have shown hundreds of cases where those people had their tumors either shrink or completely vanish. And that's what they call spontaneous tumor regression. And it's really hard for mainstream medicine to explain this. They just view it as some kind of miracle, right? Something they can't explain, like idiopathic miracle. And but from this theory's angle, we can understand it from the viewpoint that, well, if cancer tumors really are backup detox organs, then when you lower the toxic load, then the body will have less of a need for a backup detox organ. It'll probably heal its primary detox organs. And then once the primary detox organs are all fixed and working well, it's like, oh, I don't need that other detox organ. So I can decommission it and dismantle it, like you said. So it is documented that this can work in the literature. And that is sort of the basis of, and I'm not giving medical advice to people, but nevertheless,
no.
Yeah, but nevertheless, if one was to build a sort of treatment protocol around this theory, the treatment protocol would basically be lower your toxic load as much as you can. Get on a very low toxin diet, right?
And that's the trick, though, isn't it? Right? Because what we've been told is a low toxin diet is actually stupid, crazy, sky high in oxalate. And so I have seen people who have attempted to adopt like an extra healthy diet where they get sicker, but all we've done in that case is swap one toxin for another potentially. And so, yeah, that's really the challenge. My whole focus now in my nutrition practice, which has changed over time, is this whole idea of a nutrient dense, low toxin diet, and then doing the cost benefit analysis, so to speak, for anything that you would eat, right? How much toxin is here? What's the benefit I'm getting from it? And it should be done per bite, not calorie, because your body doesn't care about calories. It cares about nutrients. And so there's this whole piece that people where the connect the dots kind of falls apart.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that we have to fight the misinformation out there about what is good for us and what's bad. And so we really have to be careful about, that's why I like this sort of, creating ROS as the underlying definition of what a toxin is. So then we can categorize things. Cholesterol is not a toxin, oxalate is a toxin. And so, yeah, that can sort of resolve debates and things. But yeah, and I think that it is also interesting that if you were to go on a low toxin diet, the tumor probably wouldn't disappear immediately, because it does take time, of course, to actually detox. Like we all know that it can take quite a while to get the oxalates out of your body, quite a while to get the heavy metals out, the seed oils out. It can take, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on the person.
Absolutely. I was going to say that the time frame is years. It's not days, weeks, or months. And that's the challenge for most people when they're trying to wrap their head, so to speak, around oxalate, just as one example. Because the slowest turnover tissue in your body in terms of remodeling itself and then having the opportunity to get rid of toxins would be bones.
Bone.
And we've got oxalate that can be in there. And so 7 to 10 years, and people go, oh my God, I'm not going to be sick for 7 to 10 years. And I'm going, no, you won't. But we have to keep in mind that this process is more marathon than sprint. And if you want to run 42 kilometers, just as an example, you better not be laying everything down on the track in the first click, right? You have to kind of be able to keep yourself well enough, manage the process well enough so that you've got it for 42 kilometers as opposed to just that first click. And I think that's where people get kind of lost in the whole idea of toxins and how to manage toxins and how to get them out. And it's not a quick fix. We're kind of back to it's the whole business of dealing with something quickly. Like if I have cancer, I'm going to go and get it cut out, right? Because that's fast, it's gone. Or do I take this other approach where the path is less defined and the outcome takes longer? But I agree with you. There are absolutely people who are talking about like being able to reverse cancer by getting your glucose toxicity dealt with. Like there's Thomas Seyfried. Yeah. And his stuff is really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to point out that my theory is different from his theory in the sense that I
Sure.
am like,
Show us the differences there. So
yeah,
that we
yeah.
understand.
So, but I believe that my theory can explain some of his observations, right? Because he has observed clinically that the ketogenic diet, keto diets can, shrink tumors and reduce cancer and everything.
Absolutely.
But that would be consistent with my theory, which is exactly what I'm saying, right? Which is that whenever you reduce the toxic load, then the body has less of a need for a storage vault or detox organ, and so that it can decommission it. But what I would just point out is that obviously glucose, fructose, those are not the only toxins, right? So
Right. So your
if we
theory is trying to take in this bigger world of toxins, not
yeah,
just deal with one
right.
instance.
Yeah, and as you have pointed out, it is possible to do a high oxalate keto diet, right? You can do a high oxalate keto diet, right?
Yep. And
And
you
so you're
really
still
can.
getting toxicity even though you're in ketosis. And so I think that we have to be careful about hyper focusing on ketosis and just glucose and fructose, right? So anyway, so I think it's better to broaden what we do call a toxin and say, yes, glucose and fructose are toxins in excess, and then also there's other toxins as well that we have to be very careful about. And so, but in his theory, he's still taking the mainstream view that cancer is a disease, right? So he's still
Right.
viewing it from the lens of cancer is bad for you, cancer kills you, that kind of lens. Whereas I'm saying that actually the toxins are bad for you. The toxins are what kill you. So you should fear toxins, not tumors. And I'm, in my theory, arguing that tumors are actually the body's defense mechanism against toxins. It's something the body builds on purpose to protect the vital organs from toxicity, to be that jail cell to lock up the criminals. And then,
But if the criminals are running away with the whole system, then presumably your coping mechanism might run away with the system too. So that's where, like, your argument lines up completely with, if I continue to eat a high oxalate diet or a high toxin diet, right, then my body's coping mechanism at some point is going to become destructive too. Like, it's going to run away with the whole system. It's the last line of defense is kind of what it's sounding like.
it is the last line of defense. However, I think that I think we have to just be open-minded to what the true cause of death is in cancer, because yes, it is true that people who have cancer die, but if this is why I try to formulate a broader theory of disease based on
Right.
toxicity. So if toxicity is the root cause of disease and cancer is a symptom of toxic overload, then people are in a very precarious situation when they have cancer, because and you have to make the correct decisions whenever you're treating cancer. Like, so imagine you get a cancer diagnosis. So you do have toxic overloads, you're in a bad situation. So there's like two pathways you can take. You can either add more toxins to the mix to try to attack the tumor, or you can try to reduce your toxic load to get spontaneous tumor regression. And this is where I think that, I recognize that my view is unconventional, but I believe that the cause of death in cancer is often mislabeled. I believe that it's not necessarily the tumor that's causing death, but actually toxins and the toxic overload. And it is worth pointing out that the mainstream treatments, chemotherapy and radiation, are inherently toxic. Both of them do create ROS in the body. And in fact, when I looked it up to see how much ROS they create, chemotherapy was actually the number one most toxic chemical in the list that AI listed for me.
That's not a surprise, is it?
Yeah,
Because it's going in there to kill things, so it
exactly.
can't be a non-toxic thing.
Right. So
Um,
imagine you have, yeah, exactly.
well, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, but what ran through my head is the whole challenge of some people have these toxic treatments, but they actually get remission of cancer. So what would be the argument there? Just like, these are things I'm sure that other people have questions about, but that's really the only one that I think would probably be on people's minds. Like, how does chemotherapy actually work for some people? How does radiation actually work for some people then, if we're actually adding toxic load to the body?
Yeah, and it is true that you can shrink a cancer tumor with toxic chemicals, and it does shrink the tumor. But nevertheless, it is also very common to have a rebound cancer,
Yeah, that's true.
a rebound tumor. So, and then we can understand that. Now, imagine you have someone that has a lot of toxins circulating in their body, and then they also have a lot of toxins stored up inside of a tumor. Now you add a third source, which is the chemotherapy, to the mix. And the chemotherapy is directly damaging to the body, but it also indirectly releases the toxins that are stored inside the tumor, because it actually kills the tumor. Because you can think of cancer cells as kind of vulnerable. They're already packed full of toxins because that's their job. And then if you just add more toxins, you can kind of push them over the edge, and then they die, they apoptosis, they basically burst. And
Right.
so that's what chemotherapy does. That's what radiation therapy does. That's what a lot of other mainstream treatments do, is that they add more toxins to the mix, and that forces the cancer cells to die. It just kills them. And then, but now imagine that you have a cell that previously contained excess microplastics, forever chemicals, heavy metals, oxalates, seed oils, and all those were stored inside of the tumor. And then poof, you just burst open that storage vault, and now all those criminals are free to roam. You have like a jailbreak, and
Right.
then they roam around the body and they cause damage. And then, of course, the body is scrambling now. It's like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? I have to build a new tumor, right? And then so that can explain why it's common to get rebound tumors that are more aggressive. So it's very common for things to get more aggressive the more you kind of treat it. And then, of course, the language is confusing, because in this theory, I'm interpreting the aggressive growth as not something the cancer is trying to do, but something the body is asking the tumor to do. The body's saying, like, please grow bigger because I need more storage space. And so that's this kind of reinterpretation of why a tumor would grow aggressively. And yeah, so, but if toxicity is the root cause of like every chronic disease, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease, kidney disease, Hashimoto's, autism, then you can actually drive people to get new diseases by treating the cancer. So if you treat the cancer, you can give someone an actual new chronic disease. And so that's the concern, right? We don't want to be like treating the cancer and giving someone diabetes and Alzheimer's. So that's why I think it's very precarious. Like with cancer, you have to very carefully think about what decisions you make and which path you go down. Do you want to go down the path of adding more toxins to the mix, or do you want to go down the path of reducing your toxic load and trying to go for spontaneous tumor regression? Yeah. So, yeah. So that's my thoughts there. And, and there's even other people. By the way, I'll just mention that I'm building on the work of previous people.
We all stand on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly.
Like, I did not get to this oxalate thing all by myself either. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then the key person who inspired my theory was Stephanie Seneff. She's a MIT senior researcher.
Yep.
She basically mapped out my theory, TST, for a particular toxin called deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. It's also found in plant-based foods. But in any case, so she kind of mapped it out in detail, how cancer cells like sequester and hoard deuterium. And then I heard her give a talk, and I was inspired to like look into it further. I actually reached out to her. But even before her, there was Tom Callan. He's sort of unconventional doctor, and he has basically said that cancer tumors are like garbage bags that bag up the garbage. He sort of put it in more colloquial terms, but nevertheless, he also has videos out there saying that, if you get a cancer diagnosis, and he, by the way, has a clinical practice where he actually treats patients, but he has said that, yeah, if you have a cancer diagnosis, the first thing that you should do is be thankful and be grateful to your body for protecting you. That's the way he puts it, which is very different from the mainstream view, where they sort of scare you and say, be very scared and you're in trouble.
Well, because it's like something's attacking you, right? It's very interesting how language can affect how we think about something. So I'll give you an example, because I think language is actually way more important in our science than we think it is. So I've heard many people speak about glucose as preferred fuel. This is a great example, right? Preferred fuel for the brain. And I remember sort of wrestling with that because I was going, no, there's this place where glucose becomes very toxic. Like it's not preferred fuel. And then I realized that if I used my own analogy to rocket fuel, it was priority fuel. When a rocket is sent up into space, it burns that fuel in a certain order, right? So it's priority fuel. So sometimes I think we're almost getting caught by our own analogies on some of these things. So
That's beautiful. I really love the word priority fuel. I think you're absolutely right on that. It's like
I honestly think this is a big deal. That languaging is a big deal. So the more that we talk about this, the more I'm thinking this is a mind map. It's a different mind map for how to look at what's the trigger for certain kinds of bodily responses, right? And I think the challenge, and maybe this is because I come from a background where I have a little bit of this, I have a little bit of that, I have a little bit of something else. Like I took courses from almost every faculty at university with the exception of religious studies and what else did I miss? Oh, business of all bloody things. I took things from everywhere else, science, anatomy, sociology, blah, blah, blah. And so the interesting thing for me is that then I went and did a master's in library and information science. And that's a real connect the dots place. You're thinking about how to structure a body of knowledge on an area, for instance, on a subject area. And it started to become clear to me how important language is. And oh, by the way, I'm the child of a French Canadian mother and a Swiss father, and you could see language affecting how they talked all the time. I remember being very young and looking at them and going, you're using English words, but you're not thinking English thoughts. So language matters here. So maybe this idea of priority is something that fits in here because the body has priorities too, right? Like, so priority fuel, not preferred. Priority activities, not preferred, right?
Right.
Just because the body does it first doesn't mean it's the body's preference. What if it's a priority? And what if the priority is being driven by something other than this is a good thing in the case of sugar? Right? Like it's doing something in a particular way, not because sugar is like better than, it's because this is dangerous stuff and I got to do something with
it. Yes, it's priority detox, right? You can view it as priority detox. But yes, I absolutely agree with that. It's also well known that with like fructose, for example, it quickly neutralizes, well, in my view, neutralizes basically the toxicity of fructose. But yeah, I love your focus on language. I totally agree. Obviously, in the case of cancer, we have a lot of language issues.
And the language right now is very much, I'm being attacked and this is the bad guy, right? Like, so the language is not, this is my body's adaptation to something, or this is my body's response to something. The language is, this is a bad guy and we have to kill it. And like, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's kind of like that, right? So maybe this is also an interesting opportunity to re-language how some of this stuff is talked about, so that we have another way to access our understanding of it. Because we can only understand as far as our words are taking us, and if our words are biasing our thought processes right out of the gate, I think that's probably a disadvantage. So yeah, anyway, that was something I had been thinking about in terms of things like sugar in particular, but like this idea of priority rather than preferred. So if one of the things that's a priority for the body, and this would make perfect sense to me, is detox, and one of the things that's a priority for the body is, if this is a bad thing, I want to get rid of it, so excretion, then that would really change some of the thought process on these things.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I really love your focusing on the language. Obviously, in the case of cancer, we have words like malignant and benign, which I personally do not view as very helpful. Certainly, like in this theory, if it's right, basically all tumors are actually benign. And of course, it is possible that if a tumor grows big enough, it could cause some kind of problems. But nevertheless, it's not the root cause of disease. It's not
Right.
really I'm saying the root cause of disease are the toxins. And if the body felt a need to build such a large tumor, then that must mean it has a lot of toxins.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, malignant, benign, those are not helpful. Aggressive is not a very helpful term.
And viewing the cancer as other than us. Like, what's building the cancer? It's your cells, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think there's some interesting
Yeah,
opportunities.
and then also, the body invests infrastructure into a tumor. It actually builds new blood vessels. They call it angiogenesis, right? And then it also builds an actual mechanical scaffold to physically support the tumor and hold it into place. Why would the body invest all those resources? It's like civil engineering, like constructing a mechanical scaffold and then also building the pipes to go into the tumor. And you can imagine a lot of the toxins are in the blood. And so it needs to supply the blood supply for the tumor to act as a detox organ, right? So and it's really the body building those blood vessels. It's not like the cancer tumor is somehow constructing those blood vessels. The body is building the blood vessels to go into the tumor. So it's not like the tumor doesn't have a brain. It's not like some sentient being that's kind of like coordinating everything. But the body does, and his body is. And so, so why would the body invest so much infrastructure if the tumor is the enemy? And so that's my argument there. But
well, I think we're going to have people's heads spinning, so maybe we should tie up at this point. We can always do another follow-up,
right?
But I think that at least gives people something to think about, I'll say.
Absolutely.
And a bit of context for where you're coming from. And I'm going to say, if you want to see more of Patrick's stuff, he has a YouTube channel. I'll make sure he gives me the link for that. And you also have a Substack, so people can subscribe to you there. And if people want to follow along with my musings on oxalate and how to deal with that, you can find me obviously on YouTube, but I'm also on a scattering of social media. You probably are too. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. And I also have a Patreon group where I'm really digging deep into this low toxin, nutrient dense diet idea, because I do think that people haven't thought about their diet that way, and that what we really have to consider is it's not just fuel. And in fact, maybe that's part of the problem with focusing on sugar, because sugar is only something that we can really use as a fuel by and large. But we need to think of it as our replacement parts. So I don't think people think about what they're putting in their mouth as the replacement parts for all this, so that the body you end up living in next week, next month, next year, next decade is being built at the moment from what you're consuming. And so, that kind of all plays in here. If you're eating, hopefully, a nutrient dense, low toxin diet, then you're avoiding some of these things that we've been talking about. So that you can find my musings on more of that on Patreon. So is there anything else you want to add, Patrick?
Well, I just want to thank you so much for this great conversation. I definitely encourage all the viewers to check out Monique's channel, the Low Ox Coach. And wanted to thank you again for your help in getting me through oxalate dumping.
Oh, you're welcome. It's not fun.
Yeah. And this has been a really fantastic conversation. I feel like we covered a lot of different topics in detail, and it's been, really fantastic conversation. So thank you so much. And I think that's all.
Well, I think if people want to hear more, they can comment on both our channels. I'd be more than happy to have a follow-up conversation where we dig into some more rabbit holes and follow our noses in other directions. And so thank you as well, Patrick, because we wouldn't have had this conversation if you hadn't have reached out and said, hey, let's talk.
Yeah,
And I would love to explore some of these things
yeah,
more. So
let's do
maybe
it.
we can do that next time.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.